Welcome. This is In the Evening with Ike Kruchler. This story is about a young woman who swam a lot, worked late, and I can't tell you her name, so we'll call her Jane. Oh, and her grandfather had a watch. There you go, all caught up. Like I said, Jane liked swimming, so much she did it competitively, at least in high school. But now she was 5 years into a 4-year degree, worked at an all-night breakfast and lunch place. I won't say which one for fear you'll check it out. And the only competitive swimming she really had time for was treading water, trying to stay afloat above her student loans. Still, to her credit, she carved out the time to train, do a few laps around the 50-meter pool at her local rec center, which, lucky for her, was open late. She didn't do this every day, of course, just when her shifts and classes and other commitments allowed her. Just when she could feel herself getting soft, getting old, losing what she'd had when she was so young, full of energy, full of hours in a day that just didn't seem to stick around anymore. She trained just frequently enough to stay on top of it, just infrequently enough that it hurt like new after every workout. To live like Jane, one must abandon such frivolities as a social life outside of efficient, flavorless meals with one's roommate, and surrender oneself all but entirely at the altar of the god of time. She kept the watch around her wrist like a Christian keeps a crucifix around their neck. That is to say, unfailingly, bound to it by pride, devotion, and a habitual discipline. There was only one time of the day when Jane would take off her watch, and that was when she was in the water. This wasn't one of those newfangled plastic watches that I assume you get out of cereal boxes that can withstand water seepage, water pressure, waterboarding, the waterworks. No, this was an old-school Swiss number, made of real metal, always dependable. Had another, smaller clock on its face, very classy. The kind of watch Jane herself wouldn't be able to afford in 10 years of 24-hour breakfast nights. Her only palpable link to a nicer, finer way of life. It was given to her by her grandfather who, as grandfathers are wont to do, had kicked it not too long after her high school graduation. The watch had been a gift to the young and accomplished athlete scholar, the girl who carried on her shoulders the weight of the expectations only an only child from ambitious parents can try and of course fail to uphold. And when she grew to learn that the world would be against her at her every turn, and that the warm, encouraging pride of her grandfather had, in fact, accompanied him 6 feet underground, leaving above it only the pushiness of her nervously anticipative parents who had since split up, and looked on her now as an Ernest Hemingway type looks at racing horses from the stands with a fistful of crumpled francs, the iceberg breached her hull, she took in water, and she sank. Now she was all but drowned, though all she knew was swimming, and her granddaddy's watch, once a generous gift, was priceless sunken treasure, to be preserved at all costs. You can imagine, then, her horrible, frantic dismay when she went to the locker room at 9 at night, after a 90-minute swim, after a 5-hour shift, after 2 3-hour lectures and 5 hours of sleep, to find her padlock on the linoleum, her locker door ajar, and some shifty freak whose face she couldn't see from across the room rummaging around in there. She let out some kind of sound in protest, which alerted the fiend who, without stopping to turn to her, immediately fled out the other door. Now she was alone in there, dripping wet, in her bathing suit. She didn't think, 'cause she didn't need to think. She knew that her locker had nothing but crummy clothes and a tote bag in it now. She knew he'd taken the only thing in there that had been of value, the only thing in her life that was of value, the watch. After a few heartbeats, she gave chase. But since he'd had about 20 feet and 2 seconds worth of a head start, and since she had no shoes, wet feet, and very little energy left in her, she knew it was hopeless. She came to a door leading outside, to an alley behind the rec center, which connected the 2 ends of the parking lot out front. The door was swinging shut when she got to it, and as she burst outside, head first, The cold night air hit her like a freight train and forced her to stop and think this through. The man was nowhere to be seen. He had run out of there, but he could have gone either way down the alley, and with her heart beating so loud in her ears, she couldn't very well hear any movement from any direction. The asphalt of the parking lot was uneven back here, and the ground was covered in little sharp pebbles and bits of broken glass that orbited a dumpster to her left. She was barefoot, not thinking straight, and had about a 50% chance of going the wrong way. And even if she lucked out, he could be at his car by now, at which point the game was over anyway. Not to mention the fact that if she took her hand off this door, it would swing closed, lock automatically, and leave her outside, cold and alone behind the rec center with an unpredictable individual about. But fun was over. She was out of options, and her granddaddy's watch was gone forever. Her legs were burning. She was breathing uncomfortably hard, and the night air was attacking her nerve endings all over. She gave herself a good long moment to calm down. She let herself lose track of time for a spell, wait for her heartbeat to get the memo. She stood stunned and defeated. Half outside the door as the sad truth began to set in, and as her eyes adjusted to the dark, she thought of her grandfather. And just as she did, her peripheral vision was alerted to movement on her right, and, still not quite over the excitement, her head snapped reflexively to see it. She only got a half-second's worth of a look, but she saw, and in this heightened state, she was sure of what she saw. Way at the end of the alley, from around the corner, a head popped out, just slightly, then ducked back away right as she noticed it. And it was too far away to see clearly, but it was definitely there. And it was definitely him. This was the man who had stolen her watch. He was still here. And he knew she was too. This didn't make any sense to her at all. He had had the advantage. He had won. He had gotten away. Why hadn't he gotten away? She could hear clearly now, and she didn't hear anything. No footsteps. She didn't hear him running away. She didn't hear a car door slam, an engine start. He was there, just around the corner. He was waiting for her. Before she knew what she was doing, she was back inside, feeling her toes come back to life. She was sitting hunched on a bench in view of a receptionist's desk, her tote bag on her feet. She wasn't shivering because she wasn't breathing. She still couldn't make sense of what had happened, but somewhere in her reptile brain she knew exactly what it had been. At some point, the receptionist asked her if she needed anything. At some point, she responded with a request. At some point, the cab she had requested arrived, and she was instantly inside, still in her swimsuit. She got home safe that night, but she didn't sleep much. Early the next day, she went back to the rec center, her hair crusty with the chlorine she hadn't bothered to wash off. She moved noiselessly to the alleyway, to where he had been, hoping desperately that she wouldn't find what she knew was there. It was there, left on the ground, the glass face spiderwebbed from contact with the asphalt. Her grandfather's watch. What the man had stolen. A valuable item he had taken from her. Something he could have gotten away with, pawned off for good money. But instead, he had tossed it on the ground, discarded it. She knew what had happened. He hadn't wanted the watch. All he wanted was for her to come get it.